You're welcome to start anytime.
Thanks a lot, Kay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, wait a second, Elaine. Okay, let's start. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the first multi-part computation session. The format is the following. We're going to have 5-minute talks from every speaker, and the questions are at the end of the session. So you can post the questions on Zulip or on the Zoom chat if you don't have access to Zulip. And you can also post the questions during the talks, okay? But we will answer all of them at the end. So first we have Elaine. She's going to talk about game theoretic fairness meets multi-party protocols, the case of leader elections, which is a joint work with Kai Min Chung, Hubert Chen, and Tin Nguyen. Elaine, you can start.
Thanks, Antigone. I'll talk about our paper, Game Theory Meets Multi-Party Protocols Inspired by Blockchains. So imagine you write a paper, you send it to a conference, and there's another paper with an identical result, in this case, even identical title. So the WISE PC recommended to merge the two papers. And now the most difficult challenge is who should go to the conference to present the paper. So that's a problem we know how to solve. For instance, we can run a coin toss protocol. In this case, I'm running this protocol with Shafi, who's co-author on the other paper. We both encrypt a random bit. We post the commitment to a blockchain. I mean, in this case, the blockchain is serving as a public bulletin board. Then we both open our commitments and we XOR the outcome. So Shafi prefers 0, I prefer 1. So in this case, I win. So it works very nicely. And I may be concerned that Shafi, may be malicious and she might abort from the protocol. Because this is a commitment protocol, any misbehavior is the same as aborting. But it's not a problem here because if Shafi aborts, we can just declare, myself to be the winner. Okay, so that's great. And this is coin toss protocol, and it has been studied for a long time in the multi-party computation literature. We know that in the MPC literature, we typically consider a strong notion of fairness, which requires that the corrupt or strategic player cannot bias the coin at all for the honest player. Unfortunately, we know that there's strong impossibility results whenever this is played among two parties, or whenever we have n parties, but half of them may be corrupt. But this didn't stop Blum's protocol, and you may ask why. And if you think about it more carefully, in fact, Blum's protocol actually achieves a strictly weaker notion of fairness, essentially game theoretic fairness. So in the protocol we have seen, it's not like Shafi cannot bias the outcome. She can indeed bias the outcome, but it will only hurt herself and benefit me. Okay, so since Blum's protocol achieves game theoretic fairness in a two-party setting, it's very natural to ask, can we achieve game theoretic fairness in multi-party coin toss? So when we first started working on this problem in 2018, we were surprised to find that this has not been considered. Okay, or more precisely, we are actually asking, assuming potentially there can be a majority coalition and no setup, can we achieve this? Because if there's honest majority and trusted setup, the problem may be trivialized. Okay, so if we establish feasibility, we can also ask the complexity of such protocols. It turns out there are actually two very natural formulations for n-party coin toss with game theoretic fairness. The first formulation is like binary roulette. Let's say every player bets on either 0 or 1. And if your bet agrees with the outcome, you win. And let's say the set of winners will divide the pot of bets. In the second formulation, it's more like lottery or leader election. And this is what I want to talk about here, right? So basically n players, they want to elect a single random winner, and the winner will take the entire pot. So for the first formulation, we have a couple other papers that establishes like a complete characterization of the feasibility and infeasibility, and under what parameters is it feasible. And then in this paper, we mostly consider the second formulation, which is like leader election. Just to clarify, when I said the winner will take the entire pot, we can just equivalently rescale the utility and just assume the winner has utility 1 and everyone else has utility 0. So these players are rational and they want to kind of, optimize their utility. So leader election has a lot of applications in blockchain and smart contracts. I won't go into details. So first, let me show you a kind of like a folklore protocol, which takes log n rounds. The idea is we can pair these players up, and each pair will run Blum's coin toss protocol to elect a winner, and then the winners are paired up again, and this continues in a tree-like fashion until like a winner is elected at the end. In the general case, it takes log n rounds, and this tournament tree protocol has very nice properties. So first, you can show that no coalition. Also, by the way, it's important to note that at any point of time, if any player, aborts or misbehaves, and they're kicked out, right? So essentially, because of this, no coalition can benefit itself because, the only possible misbehavior is equivalent to aborting, but that's going to only hurt yourself. And secondly, we can also show no coalition can actually harm any honest individual either. So with these, properties, it's very nice because essentially, no matter what your goal is, whether you are, strategically trying to maximize your utility or try to hurt others, it doesn't matter. Honest behavior is an equilibrium, like it's your best response. Okay. So we want to ask, given this folklore protocol, can we basically achieve something similar, but in little or log n rounds? Okay, so let me tell you our result. I won't have time to go into the actual proofs and constructions. So on one hand, we prove a lower bound. And the lower bound says if we insist on protocols that are very similar in structure to the tournament tree protocol, then it's hopeless. Like log n rounds is the best you can do. And what do I mean by similar in structure to the tournament tree protocol? So in the tournament tree protocol, it works like everyone commits to something and they immediately reveal it in the next round, right? So this is called the commit and immediate reveal model. And if you are constrained to this model, log n is the best you can hope for. But this lower bound is not a deal breaker. It's more like a sanity check because we don't have to tie our hands and be constrained to this model. So on the upper bound side, we show that, if we are willing to make a couple relaxations. So first, suppose we are willing to accept approximate fairness rather than perfect fairness. And second, if we are willing to, use cryptography in general and not just this like stringent commit and immediately reveal model, then we can achieve protocols that are as small as log n rounds, right? So this is kind of like an exponential improvement over the tournament tree protocol. So these are the results. I don't have time to go into details. You can see our paper if you are interested. And I also want to stress that in our paper, we actually define a better solution concept, a stronger approximate fairness notion called approximate sequential fairness. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Elaine. We will take questions at the end, so please stay around. So next we have Mingguan Wang. Are you here? Oh, great. Oh, Elaine, can you stop sharing your screen?
She already did, actually.
Okay, I think my connection, maybe it's slow. Okay, next we have Mingguan. I hope I don't mess up with your name. So he's going to talk about computational hardness of optimal fair computation beyond Minicrypt, which is a joint work with Hemantha Magic. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. You can see my slide and hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about computational hardness of optimal fair computation beyond Minicrypt. This is a joint work with Hemantha Magic. So in this talk, we will be focusing on two-party coin tossing protocols. So we will be using R to denote the number of messages exchanged between the two parties. So fair computation guarantees output delivery to the honest party. So whenever a malicious party prematurely abort, the honest party should still output a bit as his output of the protocol. So the unfairness is defined by how much a malicious party can deviate the expected output of the honest party. So why we study coin tossing? Because this is a minimum task that already captured the hardness of achieving fairness. So let me first summarize the state-of-the-art result. So first, in Pestilent, where one-way functions do not exist, we know that for general adversaries, any coin tossing protocol is constantly unfair. On the other hand, if you consider a restricted type of adversary called fail-stop adversaries, so these adversaries will behave semi-honestly. The only malicious behavior is that they might prematurely abort. So for these restricted adversary, Cleveland and Impagliazzo show that any coin tossing protocol is 1/√R unfair. So recall that R is the number of messages in the protocol. On the other hand, in the 1980s, after a sequence of work, we have this beautiful protocol called majority protocol that achieves 1/√R unfairness. In another celebrated work, Cleve proved a strong lower impossibility result that any coin tossing protocol is at least 1/R unfair. So hence a coin tossing protocol that achieves 1/R unfairness is called optimal fair. So for a long time, we do not know whether optimal fair coin tossing exists. It's a very groundbreaking result when Moran, Nau, and Sagiv show how to construct optimal fair coin tossing based on oblivious transfer. And finally, in one of our recent work, we show that any coin tossing protocol that uses one-way function in a black box manner is at least 1/√R unfair. So we can roughly color code this table into two colors. The green cells are all those secure constructions and adversarial attacks that give you 1/√R unfairness. And the red cells are all those constructions and adversarial attacks that gives you 1/R unfairness. So given this state-of-the-art result, it's natural to ask whether oblivious transfer is necessary for optimal coin tossing. For example, can we construct optimal fair coin tossing based on public key encryption? Or maybe based on PKE, there is a protocol that achieves some intermediate unfairness. So in this talk, we rule out such possibilities. First, we show that any coin tossing protocol that uses public key encryption in a black box manner is at least 1/√R unfair. Additionally, we consider a setting where parties not only have public key encryption, but they also have ideal access to a trusted party realizing some functionality F. So this is the F hybrid model. And we show that as long as this F hybrid does not facilitate oblivious transfer, then even in this setting, any coin tossing protocol is 1/√R unfair. So our work strengthens the belief that oblivious transfer is necessary for optimal fair coin tossing. So this table might give you the impression that everything is ruled out. So let me emphasize what are the problems that are still open. So among many things, one thing in particular we did not prove is that we did not prove a black box separation between securely realizing F and optimal fair coin tossing. To prove such a result, one has to present a set of oracles relative to which the secure protocol for F exists, but optimal fair coin tossing does not. So intuitively, this is very challenging because parties could use these oracles in ways other than just evaluating F. So in particular, if one indeed proves such a result, it would prove a separation between securely realizing some incomplete functionality F and oblivious transfer. So this is one of the major open problems in the field, and our results can be seen as making partial progress towards this goal. And finally, our technical approach follows the paradigm by our last year's work. In that work, we show that a fail-stop attacker can impose 1/√R unfairness for any coin tossing in the random oracle model. So we know that this attacker generalizes to other settings as long as we have the following invariant, which is that Alice and Bob's private view are close to independent condition on the partial transcript. As long as this invariant is always maintained, one can get 1/√R unfairness. So for the public key encryption, we imported the result by Mohammadi Maji and Prabhakaran, who define a set of oracle facilitate public key encryption and show that there is an attacker who can ask polynomially many queries to ensure such an invariant. And for the F hybrid result, Killian gives this beautiful characterization for all incomplete functionality F, which implies that this invariant hold in F hybrid model. So this gives us the result. And I will end my talk here and refer you to the paper for more details. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So please stay for the questions.
Okay.
I think next we have Sophia.
Yep.
Great. So Sophia is going to talk about you. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you're going to talk about the YOSO. Yeah. So she's going to talk about you only speak once, secure MPC with stateless and ephemeral roles. And the co-authors are Greg Gentry, Sai Halevi, Hugo Kravchik, Bernardo Magri, Jesper Nielsen, Tal Rabin, and Sophia is giving the talk.
All right. Thanks, Antigone, for the introduction. So YOSO stands for You Only Speak Once. And as the name suggests, it describes a class of protocols where no one needs to speak more than one time. And this kind of thing is particularly useful when we're dealing with an adaptive adversary who can corrupt anyone at any point of the protocol, but is unable to take back messages that are already sent. So in this work, we make two separate contributions. We define a formal YOSO model, and we describe two different YOSO MPC constructions. So before getting into these contributions, I'd like to give a little bit more of a motivation for the YOSO model, specifically in the context of MPC. And since this is the MPC session, by the way, I didn't check with you guys. Do you see my slides?
Yes, we
yeah.
do.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead.
So since this is the MPC session, I don't want to give much of an introduction to MPC, and instead I'll just jump right in. So imagine we have Alice, Bob, and Charlie who want to outsource a computation on their secret inputs X1, X2, and X3. And they want to outsource this to a large set of parties, maybe millions, as in the blockchain. So we assume we have a powerful adaptive adversary who can corrupt up to half of these parties. And we want to make sure that even if the adversary does this, Alice, Bob, and Charlie still get their output. So we really want the strongest MPC guarantee, which is guaranteed output delivery. But now we have an efficiency problem. So in most MPC protocols, all of the participants have to talk to all of the other participants. And this is fine if there's only a few of them, but if we're talking about millions, this becomes prohibitively inefficient. So what we really want is to make sure that the total communication complexity of our protocol is sublinear in n, which is the number of participants. So this means that in any given round of the computation, only a few of our parties speak. So these are the guys in blue. And the issue now is that once these parties have spoken, the adversary who's always watching the network sees that they spoke and might conclude that they're particularly crucial to the computation. So maybe the adversary will instantly corrupt them with some zero-day exploit. And once the adversary does this, she can prevent them from ever speaking again, which brings us to You Only Speak Once, or YOSO. So if the computation isn't done yet, we're going to need another committee to come forward and carry on. And as soon as they've spoken, they die as well. So we really continue in this fashion until Alice, Bob, and Charlie get the outputs. All right, so like I mentioned, there's two parts to our contribution. There's the formal YOSO model and then two protocols. And our model is really nice because it gives this clean split between two different components of YOSO protocols. So there's role assignment, or RA for short, which deals with the covert selection of committees in such a way that the adversary can't anticipate who they're going to be until they say something. And then there's role execution, or RX, which deals with what those committees do once they've been chosen. So a quick glance at role assignment first. The goal here is to choose our committees in such a way that they remain anonymous until they say something. But at the same time, we need to make sure that anyone in the system can send these committee members secret messages without knowing who they are. And this is important because previous committees might need to communicate secret state to future committee members, maybe by resharing it. So Ben Hamouda et al. Give one construction of role assignment that uses nominating committees And what they get is a set of anonymous keys. Those are the little locks in the right corner, where no one knows who these public encryption keys belong to, but anyone can then use them to encrypt a message that can only be decrypted by the appropriate committee member. So what we get from role assignment is a bunch of anonymous future committees, the members of which are able to receive secret messages, and with the guarantee that every committee has an honest majority. So once the roles have been assigned, we can move on to specifying how role execution works, or what these committees do once they've been chosen. So we have these two MPC protocols. The first uses computational assumptions, and it's very similar to the CDN protocol from 20 years ago. So it uses linearly homomorphic encryption together with beaver triples. And the second protocol is an information theoretic construction, or where the role execution is information theoretic, but it runs on top of computational role assignment. And this one is a little more involved because information theoretic techniques don't really lend themselves naturally to the YOSO setting. So in particular, most information theoretic MPC protocols use something called verifiable secret sharing, where the sharing phase, once the dealer shares the secret, additionally involves a verification step where the shareholders sort of talk amongst themselves, maybe with the dealer as well, to convince themselves and each other that what they have is really a valid reconstructible sharing. And the problem with this in the YOSO setting is, well, maybe they convinced each other that they had a valid sharing, but they've also spoken in the process, and they died in the process since we only speak once. So this renders the whole thing kind of useless. And we use a simple but powerful fix for this, which we call future broadcast, where each of our shareholders takes all of the messages they want to share in the future, they want to send in the future, and they secret share these to independent future committees. So essentially, they can speak once to distribute these sharings, and in doing so, schedule multiple messages in the future, which can be triggered by arbitrary events. So maybe one of those can be used for verification and some for other future actions like reconstruction and MPC. And the MPC itself that builds on verifiable secret sharing is even more involved. It has many layers, and each of these involves more committees, which makes our information theoretic construction a little inefficient, a lot inefficient actually, but it's still an interesting theory result. All right, so to conclude, we have this formal model with the neat separation of role assignment and role execution. And we have these two MPC constructions, both of which are secure against adaptive adversaries and get us total communication, which is sublinear in the number of participants. And the last thing I want to say is that this YOSO model opens a Pandora's box of open problems. So basically anything we've asked about MPC, we can ask again in the context of YOSO. All right, that's all I want to say. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Sophia. Stay around. Okay, so then we have Arushi Gwal. So Arushi, please go ahead and share your screen. So he's going to talk about fluid MPC, secure multi-party computation with dynamic participants, which is a joint work with Arka Rai Chuduri, Matthew Green, Abhishek Jain, Gabrielle Kapchuk, and Gabrielle Kapchuk. So please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about this joint work with Arka, Matt, Abhishek, and Gabe on secure multi-party computation with dynamic participants. So as we all know, MPC was originally introduced in the 80s. And since then, extensive effort has gone into trying to bring it closer to practice. And as the efficiency of these MPC protocols increases, the hope is that we can use MPC to compute large, complex functionalities, such as training machine learning algorithms or simulating large RAM programs on massive distributed data sets. However, since these are massive functionalities, irrespective of how efficient our protocol is, evaluating these could take a very long time. The problem with most of the existing literature on MPC is that it considers fixed participants that are decided at the beginning of the protocol. And in such protocols, if the computation is long drawn, some of the participants might have to drop in the middle of the computation, not necessarily because they have any malicious intent, but maybe because of some other work commitments or because they ran out of resources. In such scenarios, the remaining participants usually have no other choice but to abort the computation, and all of the work done so far goes to waste. So the main question that we consider in this work is whether the static nature of MPC protocols is really inherent, or if there is a way to design protocols with dynamic participants. To elaborate on what I exactly mean by dynamic participants, let's consider a group of parties that begin executing an MPC protocol. Now, after the begin execution, after some time, some of the parties drop out, and at the same time, some new parties join in. What we want is that they should not disrupt the computation, and instead, this old group of parties should somehow be able to communicate the result of their partial computation with the new group, so that this new group can take the execution forward without having to redo any of the previously done computation. This kind of protocol clearly reduces the burden of computation on individual parties, as it allows participants to join and leave as they wish. In this work, we present a formal model for MPC with dynamic participants. We also present semi-honest and maliciously secure constructions in this model. Let me now elaborate a little more on our model. So we model this dynamic computation in the client-server model. So as a standard, we assume that there is a static group of clients that share their inputs with the servers. Then in the execution stage, a group of dynamic servers participate to compute this function. And finally, in the output stage, the servers share the output of this computation with the clients. Now, since we are assuming that the clients are static and dynamism only shows up in the execution stage, let me just focus on this stage now. So we can view this execution stage as proceeding in discrete time steps called epochs, where each epoch could also potentially consist of multiple rounds. We assume that this epoch is further divided into two subphases called the computation phase and the handoff phase. And each epoch has a designated set of parties, which we refer to as the committee for that epoch. The members of a given committee interact amongst each others in the computation phase of the epoch. And then in the handoff phase, they talk to the members of the next committee to transfer information about the computation that they did in the computation phase. And this is basically how the protocol proceeds. We require two main properties from any fluid MPC protocol. The first is division of work, and the second is fluidity. I'll elaborate on each of those now. So division of work essentially means that every committee, should only be required to compute a small part of the circuit. In particular, the computation that they do should be independent of, at the very least, the depth of the circuit. Otherwise, if each committee is required to do a lot of work, say for instance, proportional to the size of the entire circuit, then that defeats the purpose of dynamism in some sense. Our second requirement is that the protocol should have a high churn rate, which means that the minimum commitment that a party needs to make in order to participate in the protocol should be very small. And we measure this commitment in the number of rounds in a given epoch. In fact, ideally, what we'd want is for the protocols in this model to have maximal fluidity, which essentially means that each party should only be required to communicate in a single round. And as you would see, this is only possible if the computation phase in each epoch is completely silent, that is, nobody talks in the computation phase, and the handoff phase consists of a single round of unidirectional messages from the old committee to the new committee. Finally, to summarize, we present a formal model for MPC with dynamic participants. We present information theoretic constructions of both semi-honest and maliciously secure protocols in this model. Both our protocols achieve maximal fluidity, and our maliciously secure protocol achieves security with a bot. We also implement our maliciously secure protocol. And while these are great first solutions in this new model, there are many interesting open problems, and I hope some of you would consider working on them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arushi. Okay, let's move to the next talk, which is the last talk of the session, and then we can take the questions. So next we have Varun Nararanan. I hope that was correct. He's going to talk about secure computation from one-way noisy communication or anti-correlation via anti-concentration. And that's a joint work with Sveta Akrawal, Yuval Ishai, Eyal Kusilevich, Manoj Pravakaran, Vinod Pravakaran, and Alon Rosen. So Varun, how do you call your name? Is Varun or Varun? How do you call it?
It's Varun.
Oh, great. Thank you. So go ahead.
Just give me a moment here. It seems like my video was a little messed up. So am I visible now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Antigone. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. In this work, we look at secure computation over channels when the communication is restricted to restricted to be one directional. And we are trying to realize secure computation over a channel, a given channel. This model is called one-way secure computation, or OWSC for short, and was introduced by Garg et al. In their 2015 paper. Due to its non-interactive nature, it has several practical applications and is also interesting from a theoretical standpoint. One-directional communication implies that we can only expect to compute functionalities that take an input A from the sender and provides an output f of A to the receiver, where f is some randomized function. OWC protocols have a simple structure. The sender encodes her input, say A, using an encoder, enc, and sends it to the receiver, possibly making multiple uses of the channel. The receiver decodes the output of the channel using a decoder deck to compute a potential output. Informally, in the semi-honest setting, correctness of the protocol requires that the receiver's output is distributed according to the distribution f of A when the input is A to the sender, that is. And security against the receiver requires that the receiver only learns f of A and nothing else. And the security against the sender requires that the sender only learns that the receiver's output is distributed according to f of A. An important question that was left open by the previous works is whether natural channels like BEC and BSC are OWSC complete. That is, can we realize any functionality that we want using BEC and BSC in the OWSC model? Here, BEC or binary erasure channel takes a single bit as input and erases it with some probability, say P, and otherwise lets it pass unchanged. And BSC or binary symmetric channel takes a bit and flips it with some probability, say P, and lets it pass unchanged otherwise. Our main theorem states that BEC and BSC are indeed complete with error that is inverse polynomial in the number of uses of the channel against a computationally unbounded semi-honest sender and a query bounded but otherwise computationally unbounded receiver in the OWSC model using ideal obfuscation. We will describe OWSC using ideal obfuscation in the coming slides. To put our result in context, previous results showed that we cannot demand completeness with negligible error, where the error is negligible in the number of uses of the channel, against computationally bounded semi-honest adversaries even. Furthermore, against computationally unbounded semi-honest adversaries, Specifically in the case of BEC and BSC channels, we cannot demand completeness even with arbitrarily small constant error. This result is specific to a certain kind of protocol. It's called perfectly correct with abort kind of protocol, in which the receiver knows when they're making an error. It turns out that proving completeness of BEC and BSC boils down to realizing string randomized oblivious transfer, or string ROT for short, using string erasure channel, or SCC for short. Here, ROT is a sender-receiver version of the OT functionality, or the oblivious transfer functionality. It takes a pair of strings as input from the sender and erases exactly one of them uniformly at random and passes it on to the receiver. We focus on realizing ROT using SCC using the ideal obfuscation. Let me describe the model. Here, in addition to sending the encoding of the input over the channel, as we previously described, the sender also sends an ideal obfuscation of a function f of its choice. The receiver will now have oracle access to this function f to aid in the decoding of its output. Ideal obfuscation can be realized using stateless tamper-proof hardware. So the main challenge in realizing ROT is in realizing its inherent anti-correlation. When ROT reveals the first string, it erases the second string, and vice versa. Such an anti-correlation is not inherent in a string erasure channel. It simply erases or doesn't erase a single input string. Our construction realizes a notion of computational anti-correlation by exploiting the anti-concentration of the binomial distribution around its mean. So let's briefly look at this. In our protocol, the sender sends n randomly chosen symbols x1 to xn over the string erasure channel, and then prepares the ideal obfuscation of a function f sub s comma x, which is parameterized by x and s. Here, s is a randomly chosen secret subset of 1 to n, set 1 to n, and s will be of size square root of n. The receiver can query this f sub s comma x with the string vector y it received over the channel. Now, f sub s comma x returns a0, which is the first string that is, so the input to the ROT is a0 comma a1. So f sub x returns a0 and erases a1 if the majority of the indices in the set S are erased in the query. And it returns a sub 1 when this is not the case. That is, it's the opposite case. This ensures that the receiver receives a proper output of an ROT. Exactly one of the bits, one of the strings are going to be erased. And since the sender, the string that is going to be chosen to be output is decided entirely by the string erasure channel, it is secure against the sender also. But we need to ensure security against a curious receiver who might query the function f sub s comma x several times with the objective of obtaining both a0 and a1. So in order to prevent this, the f sub s function employs some checks that exploit the anti-concentration around the mean property that binomial distribution shows. I would suggest that you take a look at this paper to see more details on this construction. So we leave two important open problems. One is that of instantiating the ideal obfuscation that we provided in the construction in the plain model. And the other one is in the ideal obfuscation model itself, where we would like to extend our result to malicious adversaries. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Varun.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the questions. In the meantime, you can post more questions if you have any. Okay, let's start with Varun. So there's a question for you from Mike Ruslik. So So it's about the definition of the one-way secure channel. Why does it not work to ask the center to locally compute f of a and then encode the result under an error correcting code for the channel?
So so security against the sender requires that the sender only learns that the receiver's output is distributed according to f of a. But if the sender is to compute the function and communicate it over to the receiver, then the distribution is a point distribution on exactly what the sender has computed, which breaks the security against the sender.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So then let's go to Fluid MPC. So a question for Arushi. What do the epochs denote if the network is asynchronous? So it's about like whether you have an asynchronous or asynchronous network.
Yeah, so in our model, we only consider synchronous channels.
Okay, so you're only synchronous. Everybody is sending a message in the same round.
Yes.
Okay, I also have a very quick question. So in every round, the parties are like fixed beforehand, so we know which parties are going to be online in that round.
No, so for example, if you're computing, say, the second round, at the time of handoff, so when you're done with the second round and it's time to sort of hand off information to the next committee, that's when you want to know what the next committee, so what the parties for the third round are. So in the first round, for example, you don't need to know in advance who the parties are going to be in the future rounds. It's only when they're going to become active do you need to know the identity so you can communicate with them. So you don't need to know the parties in advance. It's only when they're about to speak that you need to know, actually not about to speak, sorry, before they have to receive messages that you need to know their identities.
So you need to know in that round what's the committee that needs to receive the messages
before the start of that round, not any time prior to
Got
that.
it. Okay, thank you. And a similar question for Sophia, I think. Where is it? Yeah, Sophia. If there's some notion of synchrony, like the parties in one committee all send their messages in the same round or something like that. Yeah, you have the same question. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're also totally synchronous.
Okay.
But there's a lot of space for follow-up work in the asynchronous world.
Great. And as we're at Sophia, there's another question. Does the setting of perfect security have any importance to efficiency in the YOSA model as in the standard model? Is there any possibility of achieving an unconditional secure role assignment? And does that have any practical implications?
So I don't think that that it's possible to get unconditionally secure role assignment, at least not with total communication complexity sublinear in N, because that together with our information theoretic protocol would contradict a known negative result. And here I'm really embarrassed. I don't remember who to cite for this, but maybe one of my co-authors can chime in.
I don't remember all the names, but Garay is one of them.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry, and there was another part to this question, which I already forgot.
Yeah, does the setting of perfect security have any importance to efficiency in the YOSA model as in the standard model? Actually, I'm not sure.
Sorry, does it have what on efficiency?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I understand the question, but maybe I'll take a look at it on Zulip.
Yeah, I'm also not sure what that means. As in standard model, as in what? Yeah, I'm not sure. So the person who asked the question can clarify. Okay. And since we are at Sophia, I also have a quick question. So the parties that they only speak once, do we know that the ones that they're not speaking, that they went offline? Do we know that, for example, Sophia is offline in the protocol?
So that's an interesting question. So we assume we have a pool of parties that are known to be offline, online and willing to participate if they're chosen to be in a committee. And it's an interesting parameter, like how much fluidity, as per Fluid MPC, we can tolerate. This has to do with like how many committees ahead we need to talk to. But we're assuming that if I'm chosen to be on a committee, I'm going to be online.
Great, thank you. So let me see if there are other questions.
Maybe I can just give one follow-up question there to what Sophia said. So I mean, I think the protocol in the Fluid paper, they have actually a protocol where they only talk to the next committee. In our protocol with active security, the information theoretic one with active security, we do need to talk to committees that's, you know, further ahead. And it looks like an inherent problem, but we didn't manage to prove a lower bound there. So if anyone can prove a lower bound that you cannot get active security without actually talking more than one round into the future, that would be nice. Or just to give people something to do tonight. So thanks.
Interesting. And just because you just mentioned this now, so the main difference between the Fluid MPC and the YOSO, can you just like, can one of you like say what's the biggest main difference so that we are like clear? Or they are not incomparable?
So in terms of model, an interesting difference is that the Fluid world, as I understand it, relies on parties volunteering their computational powers. So we're not worried about hiding who they are. So anyone can volunteer. And also the Fluid construction, please correct me if I'm wrong, gets us security with abort. And in our motivation, we sort of really care about getting guaranteed output delivery.
Yeah, and also the other thing is that I think one of the differences, again, as I understand here, so is that in the Fluid setting, we really care about like this division of work. And for like the parties doing really like a small amount of work, so they don't really have to stay online. And it doesn't matter how many computational resources they have. It's just depending on whatever resources they have, they can join for whatever time they can. And that's it. And yeah, and the other thing that, of course, Jesper mentioned, that we really only want parties to talk to just the next committee, and we don't want the parties to stay online when they are not sort of actively participating. So they can just completely drop out. So we don't want to we don't want parties to send messages to anybody in the future, in some sense.
I see. So we have a question from Elaine. Elaine, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, I guess it's just following your question. So I wonder how the model compares with the Guo et al. In crypto 2019. There, it's also like a dropout model where there can be high churn and players can only be there for just a single round.
In my understanding, that model is very similar to ours. It's just, I think they only considered secret sharing. And I mean, our goal was slightly broader and we considered MPC.
No, there's MPC result in that paper too, for MPC.
I thought you mentioned the Goel et al. Work?
No, the Guo Pass and Shi.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that result, but I can take a look at it and get back to you.
Okay, let's check. There are more questions. Unfortunately, we're very close to the time. Let's see. Give me a second. Or if somebody else has a question, you can raise your hand. So I think there's another question that I didn't see for Arushi. To have a single unidirectional set of messages, it sounds like the new committee must be known ahead of time. Actually, maybe we answer this. So if there's an election happening, the round complexity will have to be a bit more, or maybe I'm not understanding the model.
No, that's true. So actually in our protocol, like when we talk about like fluidity, we are really only talking about the protocol execution, and like the committee election or how these parties are chosen is kept aside from the protocol. So it's true that we can plug in sort of any existing, for example, committee election protocol, and that happens sort of on the side. And when I say that you're only sending one message from a given committee to another committee, it's true that we are assuming that the election has already taken place and that the identity of this committee that we are talking to is already known.
So you can choose any protocol, election protocol. You don't give a new one. Any kind of work?
Yeah. We keep that agnostic to our protocol. Yeah.
Great.
I can add one last difference, maybe. I mean, first of all, I think it's a good takeaway from both the fluid paper and our paper that it really makes sense to separate role assignment and then role execution, right? I mean, there's been some early papers where things are described monolithic, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, most role assignment mechanisms will run nicely under any role execution mechanism, and it gives clarity to do it abstractly. And another thing is in the Yoso paper, we give a composable model for breaking protocols down, actually, and analyzing the role execution mechanisms. And it turns out to not be completely trivial, because if you have this secret role in the future, you have someone that already know that they won the role. If you take part of that party and put into the environment learns that the party won the role in the future and can corrupt it. So you have to jump through a couple of loops to make compositional analysis of Yoso's type protocols work nicely. So if someone needs a model for that at some point, you know where to look.
Yeah, and also remind me, it's also adaptively secure, right? So if you have some secret role, I will not know that. Actually, that's not exactly adaptive security, but if somebody has a secret role, nobody knows. But if you want to get adaptive security, I guess you still don't know what's the role, right? Until the round comes. So shouldn't it cover it? Or I'm missing something?
With the usual caveat that, you know, like if you plug in a computational role assignment mechanism, you get all the commitments problems of adaptive security as usual. But I mean, the information theoretic protocol in itself is adaptive secure if you choose to not plug in a concrete way to assign the roles. And when you do, you run into all the usual problems with non-committing encryption and blah, blah, blah.
Very nice. I think we actually run out of time. Let me see if there's anything else that we can answer quickly. Yeah, I think we are almost done. So thank you so much. Thanks all the speakers of the sessions. If you have more questions for the authors, please post them on Zulip, or you can also